My own family put me in a nursing home so they could steal my house. They had no idea I'd been paying the bills myself. $8,000 every month for over a year. And they definitely didn't know about the lottery ticket hidden in my old work jacket. The ticket they almost threw away. The one worth $45 million. I'm Stephen Mitchell, 78 years old, and I just learned something important about family. Sometimes the people who call you a burden are about to become one themselves. My son David thought he was so clever. His wife Nicole had it all figured out. Put the old man somewhere safe, sell his house, split the money. Problem solved. But here's what they didn't plan for. I heard every word they said about me. Every cruel joke, every calculation, every time they hoped I wouldn't live too long. They forgot I built bridges for 40 years. I know how to plan for when structures fail. 3 days after they humiliated me in front of an entire dining room full of families, I made some phone calls that changed everything. What happened next? Well, let's just say David got exactly what he asked for. A chance to see what being a real burden feels like. Drop a comment below if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. I'd love to hear your story. And hit subscribe because what I did next is going to shock you. I was the father who never said no. When David needed his first car at 16, I worked overtime for 3 months. The down payment came from my vacation fund. When he wanted to go to state university, I took out a second mortgage. 4 years, $43,000. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every day senior year. Worth it, I told myself. This is what fathers do. The wedding cost me another $12,000. Nicole wanted everything perfect. Ice sculptures, designer flowers, a band that charged more than my monthly salary. David asked sheepishly. I signed the check without hesitation. Family invests in family, I said, watching him smile with relief. Then came the house. David found a fixer-upper in a good neighborhood, needed $15,000 for the down payment. His credit wasn't quite there yet. Just a loan, Dad, he promised. I'll pay you back. I cleaned out my emergency fund. 6 months of living expenses, gone in one afternoon at the bank. I thought I was investing in family loyalty. The payback never came. David got busy with work, with life, with excuses. Things are tight right now, became his standard response. Nicole started hinting that I shouldn't expect repayment. Family doesn't charge family interest, she'd say, like I was being unreasonable for remembering. Martha saw it coming before I did. 3 weeks before the cancer took her, she grabbed my hand with surprising strength. Her voice was whisper-thin but determined. Stephen, promise me something. I leaned closer, smelling the antiseptic in fear. Don't let them take advantage of your good heart. I promised, of course. How could I not? But I didn't understand what she meant. Not then. The life insurance check arrived 2 months after the funeral. $380,000. Martha had insisted on the policy years ago. For your security, she'd said, so you never become a burden. The irony wasn't lost on me later. David helped me deposit the check. He was being unusually helpful, asking about investment options, suggesting financial advisors. You should really think about your future care needs, Dad, he said, scanning the bank receipt. These facilities can be expensive. I had no idea how badly David needed that money. That night, I sat in our empty bedroom, holding the insurance paperwork. Martha's signature was still visible on the beneficiary forms. Her careful handwriting, for Stephen's dignity and independence. I made my own promise then. This money would protect what she'd wanted to preserve. I opened accounts at 3 different banks, spread the funds carefully, kept the biggest account secret. The changes started small. David's weekly visits became bi-weekly, then monthly. When he did come, conversations centered on my expenses, my health, my future needs. Nicole started asking pointed questions about my medications, my energy levels, whether I felt safe living alone. You're not getting any younger, Dad, David said during one visit. He was looking around my house like he was measuring it. This place is too big for one person. Too many stairs. The word burden came up for the first time. We don't want you to become a burden to yourself, Nicole added quickly. Or to us. She said it with a smile, but her eyes were calculating. There are really nice communities now, places where you could have help if you need it. I found real estate brochures in my kitchen the next day. Senior communities, assisted living. David claimed he'd grabbed them just for research, but they were folded, marked up, annotated with notes in Nicole's handwriting. Equity release potential was circled in red. I started paying attention then, really listening to their conversations. They spoke in code around me, but the message was clear. My house represented their solution. My independence represented their problem. They were planning my future without asking what I wanted. The respect I'd earned over 70 years was evaporating like morning dew. 6 months after Martha's funeral, I made a decision that would save my life. I drove to Sunset Manor on a Tuesday afternoon requesting a tour. The administrator, Mrs. Patterson, showed me around personally. Polished floors, private rooms, gardens with walking paths. It looked like a resort. Our monthly rate is $8,200, she explained, leading me through the dining room. That includes all meals, housekeeping, and wellness monitoring. I watched residents playing cards, reading newspapers. They looked content, dignified. I'd like to discuss a prepayment arrangement, I told her in her office. Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows lifted slightly. It's not common, but we do offer payment in advance options. There are certain privacy protections involved. I wanted to be prepared, just in case. The contract was straightforward. I could prepay up to 12 months in advance. Full refund available with 30 days' notice. Most importantly, payment source remained confidential unless I specifically authorized disclosure. Medical privacy laws, Mrs. Patterson explained. Even family members can't access financial arrangements without written consent. I wrote the first check that afternoon. $98,400. 1 full year at Sunset Manor, paid from my secret account. The facility would bill this prepayment first, before seeking any other funding sources. Medicare, Medicaid, family contributions, all secondary to my private arrangement. Mrs. Patterson locked the agreement in her personal safe. Only you and I know about this arrangement, Mr. Mitchell. The staff will be instructed accordingly. I drove home feeling oddly relieved. I had options now. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. 3 months later, David and Nicole announced they'd found the perfect solution for my living situation. They'd researched extensively, they claimed, found a facility that accepted Medicaid, offered great care, wouldn't cost the family anything out of pocket. Sunset Manor. The waiting list is usually months long, Nicole explained excitedly. But they had a cancellation. We put your name down immediately. David nodded enthusiastically. The best part is, it's completely covered by government programs. Won't cost us a dime. The contract had one very important clause. I sat quietly while they described the facility's amenities. The dining room I'd already seen, the gardens I'd already walked, the private rooms I'd already inspected. They were so proud of themselves, having solved my problem so efficiently. When would this transition happen? I asked calmly. Next month, David said. We've already spoken with the administrator. Everything's arranged. Nicole squeezed my hand sympathetically. I know it's a big change, but you'll love it there, and we'll visit all the time. I signed their paperwork that evening. Medicaid applications, power of attorney forms, facility agreements. They watched eagerly as I wrote my name, never bothering to read the fine print, never asking about existing financial arrangements, never wondering how a facility with a months-long waiting list suddenly had immediate availability. They never asked who was paying the bills. Moving day arrived on a cold Thursday in October. David and Nicole had packed most of my belongings the night before, deciding what I'd need and what could be stored. My workshop tools went to storage. My fishing gear went to storage. My photo albums somehow ended up in their car. Medicaid has strict asset limits, Nicole explained, taping another box. We need to make sure you qualify. She was dividing my possessions into 3 piles. Keep, store, donate. The keep pile was notably small. At Sunset Manor, Mrs. Patterson greeted us professionally. She shook hands with David and Nicole, welcoming them to the Sunset Manor family. Her eyes met mine briefly, an almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging our private arrangement. The financial arrangements are all set? David asked, signing admission paperwork. Completely handled, Mrs. Patterson confirmed. Mr. Mitchell's care is fully covered under our existing agreements. It was technically true, just not the agreement David thought. Something told me I'd need evidence. That night, in my new room, I activated the small recording device I'd hidden in my shirt pocket, a gift from my engineering days. We'd use them for documenting construction meetings. Voice activated, 8-hour battery life, nearly invisible when clipped inside a button-down shirt. If David and Nicole wanted to treat me like an incompetent old man, I'd start documenting exactly how they planned to profit from that assumption. Every conversation, every plan they thought I couldn't understand, every word they said when they thought I wasn't really listening anymore. The first recorded conversation happened 3 days after I moved in. David and Nicole visited during dinner time, sitting at my table while other residents and families dined nearby. They spoke in low voices, but my small device caught every word. The house appraisal came back higher than expected, Nicole whispered. 650,000. Even after realtor fees and capital gains, we're looking at serious money. David glanced around nervously. Keep your voice down, but yeah, this could solve all our problems. Credit cards, the business loan, everything. How long before we can list it? Nicole asked. Legally, he has to be here 6 months before Medicaid considers the house exempt. After that, we can claim he'll never return home. David cut his meat methodically. The caseworker said it's pretty routine. I was sitting right there, but they forgot I existed. That evening, I called my lawyer from the phone in my room. Harold Brennan had handled Martha's will, our house purchase, 40 years of legal paperwork. He listened quietly as I explained my situation. Stephen, what you're describing could constitute elder abuse if they're misrepresenting your financial situation, Harold said carefully. Are you documenting these conversations? Everything, I confirmed. Good. I want you to consider updating your will. Add specific language about financial exploitation. If they're planning to profit from your care situation, we need to protect your assets legally. I scheduled an appointment for the following week. Mrs. Patterson agreed to arrange transportation, adding it to my medical appointments, another privacy protection. The visits became performative after the first month. David and Nicole would arrive during public hours when other families were present. They'd speak loudly about my adjustment, my comfort, how well cared for I appeared, a show for witnesses. But between the public pronouncements, their true feelings emerged. Nicole started missing visits entirely. Too busy with work, David would explain, though she had time for weekend trips and dinner parties. When she did come, she'd spend most of the visit on her phone, texting or scrolling social media. David's conversation topics narrowed to practical matters: my health status, medication compliance, any confusion I might be experiencing. He was building a case for my incompetence, documenting every minor mistake or forgotten detail. Dad, you told the same story twice yesterday, he'd say, just loud enough for nearby staff to hear. Are you taking your memory supplements? There were no memory supplements. I was sharper than most men half my age, but David needed me to appear otherwise. They were erasing me from my own life. The breaking point came during a family dinner in November. Nicole brought photo albums, my photo albums, showing pictures to other residents. These are Stephen's memories, she announced cheerfully. We're preserving them for the family. Preserving them from me, apparently. She'd removed every photo of Martha and me together. Every vacation picture, anniversary celebration, happy moment from 43 years of marriage. What remained were formal shots, holiday gatherings, pictures where I looked old and tired. She was rewriting my history in real time. I discovered their deception by accident. Mrs. Patterson mentioned seeing David in the lobby the previous Tuesday, meeting with a woman carrying real estate brochures. Pleasant conversation about property values, she said innocently. He seemed very knowledgeable about the local market. Tuesday was not a visiting day. David never came on Tuesdays. That evening I called my neighbor, Bob Hendricks. We'd lived next door for 15 years. Bob had been watching my house, collecting mail, maintaining the yard in exchange for using my workshop. Funny thing, Stephen, Bob said. I saw David over there yesterday with some woman, professional looking, carrying a clipboard. They spent an hour walking through the house, taking pictures. The realtor had already done a market analysis. I felt my chest tighten, that familiar pressure I'd learned to recognize over the past months. Not panic, determination. The clarity that comes when someone crosses a line you didn't know existed. I called Harold Brennan that night. They're preparing to sell while telling Medicaid I still consider it my primary residence, I explained. Can they do that legally? Absolutely not, Harold said firmly. That's fraud on multiple levels. Medicaid fraud, potentially elder abuse, definitely breach of fiduciary duty if they have any power of attorney. They do. I signed papers when I moved here. We need to revoke that immediately. And Stephen, if they list that house while claiming you're incompetent to make your own decisions, we have grounds for criminal charges. I scheduled an emergency appointment for Friday. Time to stop reacting and start planning. The pressure campaign began in December. David arrived for his weekly visit carrying a folder of financial documents. Bank statements, insurance papers, investment summaries. He spread them across my small table like evidence in a trial. Dad, we need to talk about your finances, he said seriously. The costs here are going to add up. We need to plan ahead. This was interesting. David thought Medicaid was covering everything. Why would costs matter? Medicare only covers so much, Nicole added. If you need additional care, memory support, medical equipment, that all comes out of pocket. She pointed to numbers on a spreadsheet. We're looking at potentially thousands per month in extra expenses. That's when I started keeping track of what they said. The responsible thing, David continued, would be to liquidate some assets now, while you're still mentally capable of making decisions. The phrase hung in the air like a threat. Still mentally capable, for now. Your house is just sitting there, Dad. Empty, expensive to maintain. Property taxes, insurance, utilities for a place you'll never live in again. Nicole's voice carried practiced sympathy. Wouldn't it make sense to convert that dead asset into something useful? Something useful meant solving their debt problems. I'd seen David's credit card statements, accidentally left in his coat pocket during a previous visit. $82,000 in revolving debt. Nicole's car payment was 6 months behind. I need time to think, I told them. David's smile was patient but strained. Of course, Dad, but don't think too long. Markets change. Opportunities disappear. January brought systematic isolation. David informed my friends that I was adjusting poorly and needed space. Phone calls from my former coworkers stopped. Visits from neighbors ended. According to David, I was easily confused by too much social stimulation. My mail forwarding was temporary, just while I settled in. But weeks turned to months, and my personal correspondence disappeared into David's management. Bank statements, insurance notices, Social Security information, all redirected to his address for safekeeping. It's easier this way, Dad, he explained. Less paperwork for you to worry about. I'll handle everything important. Everything important. Like the dividend check from my Ford stock that never reached me. The property tax notice that somehow got overlooked. The investment portfolio statements that might show exactly how much money I really had. They were erasing me from my own life. Bob Hendricks tried to visit in February. David intercepted him in the lobby. I watched from my window as David gestured animatedly, Bob's expression growing more concerned. Whatever David told him, Bob never asked to see me. He drove away looking troubled. I learned later that David had explained my deteriorating mental state, how I'd been making accusations about family members, how visits from outsiders tended to agitate me and set back my adjustment progress. Bob believed him. Of course he did. David was my son, my caregiver, my legal representative. Who questions a devoted family member's medical assessments? By March, my world had shrunk to Sunset Manor's walls. David and Nicole controlled every connection to my former life. The truth revealed itself on a rainy Thursday evening in March. David and Nicole had visited during dinner, their usual performance for the staff. But they stayed late, sitting in the empty dining room while I finished my coffee. They thought I'd gone back to my room. I'd actually stepped into the adjacent hallway, standing just outside their line of sight. How much longer do you think this will take? Nicole asked, her voice tired and impatient. The social worker said 6 months minimum for Medicaid qualification, David replied. We're at 5 months now, another few weeks, and we can list the house without complications. And if he objects, starts making noise about coming home? David's laugh was cold. Look around, Nicole. He's an 80-year-old man in a nursing home. Who's going to listen? Besides, the cognitive assessment shows clear decline. I heard exactly what they thought about my future. Cognitive assessment was news to me. I'd never taken one. But apparently David had been documenting my confusion with facility staff, building a medical record of incompetence. I just want this over with, Nicole continued. The house sale should clear our debts and leave enough for the down payment on the Riverside property. It will, David assured her. $650 for the house, minus realtor fees and capital gains. We're looking at around $500,000 clear. More than enough. $500,000 from my life's work. The home Martha and I had shared for 35 years. Reduced to numbers on their financial planning spreadsheet. I stood in that hallway for 10 minutes after they left, recording every word playing back in my mind. The invitation came in early April. David called personally, unusual excitement in his voice. Dad, we want to do something special. A real family dinner at Sunset Manor. Celebrate your adjustment to the community. I should have known it was too good to be true. They arranged everything with Mrs. Patterson, reserved the private dining area, ordered catered food, invited me to join them at 6 o'clock sharp. Dress nicely, Dad, Nicole had said during their previous visit. We want this to be memorable. Saturday evening arrived gray and humid. I put on my best shirt, the blue one Martha had bought for our last anniversary. Walked to the dining room with something resembling hope. Maybe they'd come to their senses. Maybe family still meant something. The dining room was fuller than usual. 3 other families occupied nearby tables, witnesses to whatever David and Nicole had planned. Mrs. Patterson had arranged fresh flowers, cloth napkins, the facility's best china. It looked like a celebration. David and Nicole arrived 15 minutes late, carrying a leather folder and wearing expressions I couldn't quite read. They kissed my cheek, complimented my appearance, ordered wine for themselves. The conversation started pleasantly enough. You're looking well, Dad, David said, cutting his steak. The staff says you're adapting beautifully to community life. Nicole nodded enthusiastically. It's wonderful how you've embraced this new chapter. New chapter. Like my old life had ended by choice. 20 minutes into dinner, David set down his fork and cleared his throat. The gesture commanded attention from nearby tables. Other families glanced over, probably expecting a toast or anniversary announcement. Dad, David began, his voice carrying clearly across the room, Nicole and I need to discuss some practical matters with you. The folder opened. Inside were documents, spreadsheets, official-looking papers, arranged like evidence. Nicole pulled out a property tax bill, holding it where everyone could see. Your house expenses are becoming unsustainable, David announced. Property taxes, insurance, maintenance costs for a place you can't live in anymore. His voice was professionally sympathetic, but loud enough for the entire room to hear. Every person in that room heard them say, I was worthless. We've tried to manage these expenses ourselves, Nicole added, her tone suggesting great sacrifice. But frankly, Dad, we can't afford to keep supporting this arrangement indefinitely. Supporting. As if they'd been paying for anything. As if my own home had become their charitable burden. The responsible decision, David continued, is to sell the property and use those funds for your ongoing care needs here. He gestured around the dining room like he was bestowing a gift. I sat frozen, my dinner growing cold, while other families pretended not to watch this public dismantling of my dignity. A man at the next table studied his soup intently. A woman by the window found her salad suddenly fascinating. Nicole leaned forward, her voice taking on a tone I'd heard her use with difficult bank customers, patient but firm, like she was explaining simple mathematics to a child. Dad, you need to accept the reality of your situation, she said, loud enough that the family at the corner table couldn't help but listen. You're dependent on others now. That's not shameful. It's just life. Dependent. The word hung in the air like an accusation. We're not abandoning you, David added quickly, sensing the discomfort of our audience. We're being practical, responsible. He tapped the property tax bill. This house is a luxury you can no longer afford. A luxury. The home I'd bought with 40 years of bridge building wages. The place where Martha and I had raised our son, celebrated anniversaries, planned our retirement, reduced to an unaffordable luxury. You should be grateful we haven't just walked away, Nicole said, her smile bright and cruel. Some families would have given up by now. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. The dining room was completely silent except for the soft clink of silverware. Other residents had stopped eating, their faces carefully neutral. The staff had retreated to the kitchen. Even the background music seemed to fade. I folded my napkin, placed it beside my untouched plate, and stood up slowly. My legs felt steady despite everything. My voice, when it came, was calm. "Thank you for dinner," I said quietly. It was very educational. Sleep was impossible that night. I lay in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling while their words replayed endlessly. Dependent. Burden. Should be grateful. The phrases circled like vultures, picking at 40 years of dignity. At 3 in the morning, I gave up pretending and walked to my small closet. They'd allowed me one suitcase of clothes, one box of personal items. Everything else was in storage, meaning sold, donated, or hoarded in their house. I went to the closet where they'd shoved my things. The box contained careful selections, a few family photos, my reading glasses, Martha's wedding ring, my old Bible. Items chosen to make me look appropriately sentimental but harmless. An old man clinging to memories, but hanging in the corner, forgotten and dismissed, was my work jacket. The brown Carhartt I'd worn for 30 years on construction sites. Nicole had wanted to throw it away. "It's filthy and old," she'd complained during packing day. "He'll never need it again." David had shrugged. "Fine, bring it. Doesn't matter." It was the first thing they'd been right about in months. I would never need it for work again. But as I reached into the pockets, checking for forgotten items before finally accepting its uselessness, my fingers found something unexpected. Stiff paper, folded twice, tucked deep in the inner pocket. A lottery ticket. I'd bought it 3 weeks before the family dinner. David had driven me to the grocery store, one of his rare gestures of helpfulness. While he'd compared prices on frozen dinners, calculating my food budget probably, I'd bought the ticket on impulse. $5 for impossible dreams. I'd completely forgotten about it. My hands shook as I unfolded the ticket. The numbers were printed clearly in blue ink, 7, 14, 21, 35, 42, with Powerball 18. I stared at them, trying to remember if they meant anything. Lucky numbers, birthdays, random selections. I couldn't recall my reasoning. The drawing had been last Wednesday, 5 days ago. I turned on my bedside lamp and opened my iPad, a gift from Martha that David hadn't thought valuable enough to confiscate. The internet connection was slow, but eventually the lottery website loaded. Wednesday's winning numbers appeared on the screen. 7, 14, 21, 35, 42, Powerball 18. I stared at those numbers for a full 5 minutes. Every digit matched perfectly. The jackpot amount was displayed in bold red numbers. $45,000. $45 million. I checked the numbers again, then again, held the ticket up to the lamp, comparing each digit carefully. The dates matched, the game was correct, even the store location was right. I owned a winning lottery ticket worth $45 million. For the next hour, I sat in my chair, holding the ticket and thinking. $45 million. More money than David and Nicole could spend in 10 lifetimes. More than enough to buy independence, dignity, and distance from their greed. But the real power wasn't in the money. It was in the timing. They'd planned everything so carefully. The Medicaid fraud, the house sale, the systematic isolation. They'd convinced themselves I was helpless, incompetent, dependent on their mercy. They'd made one crucial miscalculation. They'd forgotten I was still Stephen Mitchell, the man who'd built bridges across 3 states, the engineer who'd solved problems by understanding leverage points and structural weaknesses. They wanted to see what burden really looked like. Fine. I'd show them exactly what burden meant. I spent the rest of the night planning. Not dreaming, planning. The difference between 40 years of engineering and 40 years of wishful thinking. First, the ticket. It needed to be claimed carefully, privately. No publicity, no announcements until I was ready. Lottery winners had options, lump sum or annuity, public or anonymous, claiming where permitted. I needed to research state laws, tax implications, legal protections. Second, Sunset Manor. My prepaid account gave me leverage David didn't know existed. When that money was withdrawn, the facility would bill the responsible party, which, according to the Medicaid applications David had filed, was either government assistance or family guarantees. Third, the house. If David wanted to sell my property based on fraudulent Medicaid claims, he'd have to prove I was incompetent to make my own decisions. Hard to do when I was demonstrably capable of managing $45 million. Fourth, documentation. Every recorded conversation, every witness to their public humiliation campaign, every piece of evidence Harold Brennan had helped me collect. David and Nicole had built a house of cards. Time to provide the wind. But the most important element wasn't financial or legal. It was psychological. They'd convinced themselves I was defeated, broken, grateful for scraps of their attention. They'd miscalculated my capacity for strategic thinking. David had no idea his world was about to explode. I hid the lottery ticket in my Bible, between the pages of Ecclesiastes. For everything there is a season. Appropriate. I'd spent 40 years being the generous father, the selfless provider, the man who prioritized everyone else's needs above his own dignity. That season was ending. A new season was about to begin. By sunrise, I had a plan. By sunset, David and Nicole would understand what they'd actually inherited from their cruelty. I claimed the lottery prize on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after the family dinner. Mrs. Patterson arranged transportation to what she believed was a medical appointment. In reality, Harold Brennan met me at the state lottery office downtown. "Are you certain about the anonymous claiming?" Harold asked as we sat in the waiting room. "Once this is processed, there's no changing your mind." "Completely certain," I confirmed. The forms were already filled out, designating Harold's law firm as the trust administrator. No public announcements, no media interviews, no notification to family members. The lottery official, a pleasant woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, walked us through the process efficiently. "Lump sum after taxes will be approximately $28 million," she explained. "Funds will be deposited to your designated accounts within 72 hours." David had no idea his world was about to explode. I chose 3 separate banks, spreading the funds for security and accessibility. Harold established a legal trust with specific instructions about distribution and inheritance. The primary beneficiaries were carefully selected charities. Secondary beneficiaries included Martha's sister in Oregon and my old construction crew's pension fund. David Mitchell was not mentioned anywhere in the documentation. "What about your son?" Harold asked as we signed the final papers. "Legally, he has no claim to lottery winnings, but ethically—" "Harold," I interrupted gently, "you've seen the recordings. You know what they've done. Ethics is exactly why David won't see a penny of this money." The lottery ticket that had been hidden in my work jacket was now worth $28 million in accessible funds. David and Nicole had thrown away more money than they could comprehend. Thursday morning, I met privately with Mrs. Patterson in her office. She'd been curious about my increased legal appointments, but had never pried. Privacy laws protected my activities, and she respected those boundaries. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to discuss my financial arrangements here," I began carefully, specifically my prepayment contract and its termination provisions. Her expression grew concerned. "Mr. Mitchell, if there are issues with your care or accommodations, we can certainly address them. Your family has indicated they're quite satisfied. This isn't about care quality," I assured her. "It's about payment responsibility. I need to activate the 30-day withdrawal clause in my original agreement." She pulled my file from her desk drawer, reviewing the documents carefully. "Yes, you do have full prepayment withdrawal rights. But Mr. Mitchell, if you terminate this arrangement, The outstanding balance would become due immediately from whoever guaranteed your residency. The director's face went pale when I explained the situation. Your son filed Medicaid applications indicating you had no private resources, she said slowly. But you've been paying privately all along. That's Medicaid fraud, Mr. Mitchell. I understand the implications, I replied calmly. I also understand that when my private payments end, the facility will bill the responsible family member for all outstanding costs. According to David's paperwork, he's accepted financial responsibility. She calculated quickly. 14 months of residency at $8,200 per month. That's approximately $115,000. Plus the current month, I added. Yes. Mr. Mitchell, she said quietly, are you certain about this decision? Absolutely certain. Friday afternoon brought the most satisfying legal appointment of my life. Harold had prepared new will documents, incorporating the lottery winnings and reflecting my current understanding of family dynamics. Stephen, this is a complete disinheritance, Harold warned, reviewing the pages one final time. David receives nothing. No house, no personal property, no inheritance of any kind. David would never see a penny of lottery money. The new will was comprehensive. My house, which I'd secretly bought back from David through Harold's firm at 20% above market value, would go to Martha's sister. My personal effects would be donated to charity. The lottery trust would fund engineering scholarships at State University. Most importantly, there was a specific clause Harold had crafted with particular care. I hereby explicitly disinherit my son, David Mitchell, due to his systematic financial exploitation and elder abuse. This disinheritance is made with full mental capacity and clear understanding of my decision. This prevents any future competency challenges, Harold explained. If David tries to contest the will based on your mental state, this clause demonstrates deliberate, reasoned decision-making. I signed each page carefully, with Harold's secretary and paralegal serving as witnesses. Their signatures confirmed my mental capacity at the time of signing. No one could claim confusion or manipulation. There's one more document, Harold said, producing a single sheet of paper, a letter of instruction for the estate executor. And the letter was brief but precise. David Mitchell's treatment of his father constituted elder abuse, fraud, and systematic humiliation. He has received his inheritance in full, the consequences of his own choices. I signed that document with particular satisfaction. House hunting with $28 million was a different experience than I'd expected. Harold recommended a discreet real estate agent who specialized in high net worth clients. Within 3 days, I'd found the perfect property, an oceanfront condominium in a luxury community 40 miles south of Sunset Manor. 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific. The building offered concierge services, private medical care, social activities for residents who chose participation over isolation. Most importantly, it was expensive enough that David could never afford to live nearby. I was moving somewhere David could never afford to visit. The purchase was completed in cash through the trust Harold had established. No mortgage, no financing contingencies, no delays. The previous owners moved out Thursday. I could move in Monday. Harold arranged professional moving services and hired a private care coordinator. Your new building has an excellent reputation, Harold informed me during our final meeting. Security is discreet but comprehensive. Residents' privacy is their highest priority. Privacy? What a concept. For the first time in 14 months, I'd control who visited me, when they visited, and what information they received about my life. David's name was specifically excluded from the building's visitor authorization list. The care coordinator, a registered nurse named Patricia Wells, would handle medical appointments, medication management, and daily check-ins. She was accustomed to working with independent clients who valued autonomy over family involvement. I've worked with many clients who prefer to limit family contact, she said diplomatically. Your preferences will be strictly respected. Sunday evening, I packed my single suitcase for the last time. Tomorrow, I'd wake up as a free man. Monday morning, I called David with news of an important meeting at Sunset Manor. There are some financial matters we need to discuss, I told him. Mrs. Patterson requested your presence for document signing. David arrived within an hour, Nicole trailing behind with her usual impatient expression. They probably expected more Medicaid paperwork or facility agreements, more opportunities to manage my incompetent decision-making. Mrs. Patterson had arranged her office carefully for the meeting. David and Nicole sat in the two chairs facing her desk. I remained standing behind them, holding a manila folder. Mr. Mitchell has requested termination of his private payment arrangements, Mrs. Patterson began formally. Effective immediately, his prepaid account will be closed and refunded. David's face went through 5 different colors. Private payments? Nicole asked slowly. What private payments? I placed the folder on Mrs. Patterson's desk. The payments I've been making for 14 months, I said calmly. $8,200 per month. Total of $114,800. David's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. According to your Medicaid applications, Mrs. Patterson continued, you've accepted financial responsibility for your father's care in the event government assistance is unavailable. But we thought, David stammered. You thought I was receiving charity, I finished. You never asked about actual payment arrangements. You simply assumed. Nicole grabbed David's arm. How much do we owe? Mrs. Patterson consulted her paperwork. The outstanding balance, due immediately upon Mr. Mitchell's payment termination, is $98,400. I told him exactly what burden meant. David stared at the invoice Mrs. Patterson handed him. His hands trembled slightly as he scanned the numbers. 14 months of care, itemized by week. Every meal, every housekeeping service, every wellness check. All paid by the father he'd planned to exploit. This is impossible, Nicole said, her voice rising. He's on Medicaid, government assistance. We filed all the paperwork. Medicaid was never activated, Mrs. Patterson explained patiently. Mr. Mitchell's private payments took priority. Government assistance is secondary to family resources. Family resources, I repeated, letting the irony settle. Yes, Nicole, my resources. The money you thought didn't exist. David found his voice. Dad, why didn't you tell us? We would have... You would have what? I interrupted. Treated me with respect? Included me in decisions about my own life? Stopped planning to sell my house while I was sitting right there? I'd recorded every conversation, every cruel discussion about my future. Harold had provided me with transcripts of their most damaging statements. 18 months of evidence that David and Nicole had viewed me as a financial opportunity rather than a family member. You said I was becoming a burden, I continued calmly. You were right. $8,200 per month is quite a burden, especially for a son who's $80,000 in credit card debt. Nicole's face went pale. How do you know about our debts? I know many things, Nicole. I know you plan to use my house sale to solve your financial problems. I know you've been telling people I'm mentally incompetent. I know you hoped I wouldn't live too long. David was scanning the invoice desperately, probably calculating how many years of minimum payments it would take to clear this debt. I picked up my single suitcase and walked toward Mrs. Patterson's office door. Behind me, David and Nicole were arguing in whispered, panicked voices about payment plans and legal options. Mrs. Patterson was explaining that Sunset Manor expected immediate payment or formal payment arrangements within 30 days. Where are you going? David called out as I reached the doorway. I turned back to face them one final time. I'm going home, I said simply. My real home, the place I should have stayed all along. Dad, wait. We can work this out. There's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, David. You've been very clear about your intentions. You wanted to sell my house, control my finances, and manage my life like I was your property. I adjusted my grip on the suitcase handle. But I'm not your property. I'm not your burden. And I'm not your inheritance. Nicole stood up abruptly. You can't just leave us with this bill. That's not fair. Fair? I almost smiled. Nicole, you've spent 14 months treating me like I was already dead. You've insulted me publicly, isolated me from my friends, and planned to profit from my helplessness. But I was never helpless. I was just patient. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. The driver Harold had arranged was waiting in the lobby, a professional car service with tinted windows and comfortable seats. As we pulled away from Sunset Manor, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year. Freedom. The weight of their expectations, their greed, their systematic cruelty. All of it fell away as the building disappeared behind us. I was Stephen Mitchell again. Not David's father, not Nicole's financial problem, just myself. The oceanfront condominium was everything the real estate agent had promised. Sunlight flooded through enormous windows, reflecting off hardwood floors that had never known the footsteps of ungrateful children. My new furniture, purchased and arranged by Harold's recommended interior designer, was comfortable without being institutional. For the first time in over a year, I had privacy. No visiting hours, no meal schedules, no staff members checking my adjustment to someone else's idea of appropriate living. I could eat breakfast at midnight if I chose. I could watch television at full volume. I could invite guests or refuse visitors according to my own preferences. But David's nightmare was just beginning. Patricia Wells, my care coordinator, stopped by Tuesday morning for our initial consultation. She was professional but warm, treating me like a competent adult rather than a medical problem to be managed. "I understand you've recently made some significant life changes," she said diplomatically. "You could say that," I agreed. "I've discovered the difference between family and people who actually care about your well-being." She nodded knowingly. "I've worked with several clients who've had similar realizations. It's more common than people think." We established a simple routine. Patricia would check in 3 times per week, coordinate any medical appointments, and provide assistance with household management if needed. But these services were optional, requested rather than imposed. "The goal is to maintain your independence as long as you choose," she explained. "You're paying for support, not supervision." Paying. With money I'd earned, controlled, and could spend according to my own priorities. The concept was almost foreign after 14 months of being treated like a ward of the state. That evening I sat on my private balcony, watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean. The sound of waves replaced the institutional quiet of Sunset Manor. David's financial reckoning came faster than I'd expected. Harold called Wednesday morning with an update that was both predictable and satisfying. "Sunset Manor contacted me yesterday," Harold reported. "They've been trying to reach David about payment arrangements. Apparently he's not responding to their calls." "What about Nicole?" "She filed for divorce Monday. Claims David misrepresented your financial situation during their marriage planning. She's demanding half of all marital assets and disclaiming responsibility for any debts incurred through David's deceptive practices." David finally understood what expensive meant. The mathematics were brutal and simple. $98,400 due immediately. David's annual salary as an unemployed IT worker, $0. His available credit maxed out months ago. His liquid assets, approximately $3,000 in a checking account, Nicole had emptied before filing divorce papers. Sunset Manor's business office had been patient but firm. They'd offered a payment plan, $2,000 per month for 49 months. David would be paying for my care until he was nearly 50 years old. "There's more," Harold continued. "Nicole's divorce attorney is claiming David committed elder fraud by misrepresenting your competency and financial status. She's using that as grounds for asset protection." The irony was perfect. Nicole was abandoning David using the same strategy David had used against me. Claims of deception, financial manipulation, and breach of trust. The difference was that Nicole's accusations were true. "Where's David now?" I asked. "Last known address is a studio apartment on the south side. Works 2 part-time jobs, grocery store and food delivery. His wages are being garnished for the Sunset Manor debt." David tried calling me repeatedly during his first week of financial reality. Harold had changed my phone number as part of the privacy protection plan, but David didn't know that yet. He probably thought I was ignoring his calls out of spite rather than living in complete independence. According to Harold's contacts, David had driven to my old house 3 times, apparently forgetting it had been sold months ago. The new owners, a young couple with children, had called police about a man loitering in the driveway and looking through windows. David had lost his father and his meal ticket. The desperate escalation was predictable. David contacted Bob Hendricks, my former neighbor, asking for my contact information. Bob explained that David himself had warned him about my mental deterioration and paranoid accusations about family. Now David was asking Bob to ignore those warnings and help reconnect us. "It's interesting," Harold observed during our Thursday call. "David told everyone you were incompetent when it served his purposes. Now he needs to convince those same people that you're competent enough to help him financially." David had also contacted my former coworkers from the engineering firm, men I'd worked with for decades, who'd known me as a sharp, reliable professional. David was now claiming I'd been confused about family dynamics and asking if they could help him find Dad. These were the same people David had convinced to stop visiting me at Sunset Manor, the same friends he'd told that I was easily agitated by social contact. His desperation was becoming public knowledge. Former colleagues were sharing stories about David's contradictory claims. Nicole's divorce proceeded with surgical precision. She'd hired a competent attorney who understood exactly how to weaponize David's elder abuse against him. The strategy was brilliant and ruthless. "She's claiming that David's deception about your finances constituted fraud during the marriage," Harold explained, reading from legal documents Nicole's attorney had copied him on. Apparently, they'd made major financial decisions based on David's assurances about inheritance prospects. Nicole left him faster than he'd abandoned his father. The property settlement was devastating for David. Nicole kept the house they'd been living in, purchased with money I'd provided for David's first home down payment. She kept the car, the savings account, and half of David's retirement fund. Most importantly, she'd disclaimed all responsibility for the Sunset Manor debt. Her attorney had successfully argued that David's misrepresentation of my financial status constituted deception that voided Nicole's responsibility for debts incurred under false pretenses. David was alone with $98,000 in nursing home debt and no assets to leverage for payment. "There's something else," Harold continued. "Nicole's attorney subpoenaed the recordings you made of their conversations. They're using David's own words about hoping you wouldn't live too long as evidence of elder abuse." The recordings were devastating. David discussing timeline for house sale while I was still alive. Nicole calculating inheritance values based on my deteriorating health. Their public humiliation of me at the family dinner, witnessed by multiple residents and staff. Nicole was using David's cruelty toward me as legal justification for abandoning him. She'd learned his tactics and turned them against him with professional legal assistance. 6 months later, Harold provided me with updates on David's situation. The information came through legal channels. Sunset Manor's collection attorney had contacted Harold about potential asset recovery from my estate. "They don't understand that you're very much alive and completely independent," Harold said with amusement. "They assume David is handling your affairs because of the original Medicaid applications. He'd gambled everything on an inheritance that never existed. David's wages were being garnished from both part-time jobs. 25% of his gross income split between Sunset Manor and his credit card companies. After taxes and garnishments, David was taking home approximately 40% of minimum wage earnings. The studio apartment was in a neighborhood I wouldn't have visited alone in daylight. Harold had driven past it once, describing it as barely habitable. David's neighbors were mostly other people who'd experienced financial catastrophes, divorces, bankruptcies, medical debt, addiction recovery. "The irony," Harold observed, "is that David is now living exactly the kind of life he was so afraid you'd burden him with: poverty, isolation, dependency on social services." David had applied for food stamps, Medicaid for himself, and emergency rental assistance. The same government programs he'd tried to fraudulently access on my behalf were now his only safety net. Sunset Manor's collection agency was patient but persistent. They'd offered David several payment modification options, but even reduced payments would consume 30% of his income for the next 15 years. He'd destroyed his marriage, alienated his father, and mortgaged his future for the promise of money that was never coming. I established the Martha Mitchell Memorial Engineering Scholarship on the first anniversary of leaving Sunset Manor. The fund, seeded with $2 million from the Lottery Trust, would provide full tuition assistance to students from working-class families pursuing civil engineering degrees. Martha would have loved this, I told Harold as we signed the foundation documents. She always said education was the only inheritance that couldn't be stolen. I found family among people who actually cared. The scholarship recipients were carefully selected, students like I'd been at their age, smart, motivated, but without family money to ease the path. They wrote thank you letters that reminded me why I'd loved engineering, the satisfaction of building things that lasted, solving problems that mattered, creating infrastructure that served communities for generations. I also funded a support network for elderly residents who'd experienced family abandonment. Working with Patricia Wells, we identified seniors whose adult children had either exploited them financially or isolated them emotionally. The program provided legal assistance, counseling services, and social activities. You're using your experience to help others avoid the same trauma, Patricia observed during one of our planning meetings. Experience was a diplomatic word for what David and Nicole had put me through, but Patricia was right. My pain had become purposeful. Other families wouldn't be able to exploit elderly relatives as easily with proper legal protections and support networks in place. The oceanfront condominium had become a headquarters for productive activity rather than a retreat from family disappointment. 18 months after leaving Sunset Manor, I sent David one final communication. Not a phone call or meeting. He'd lost the right to personal contact. Just a letter, delivered through Harold's office to avoid revealing my location. The envelope contained a single sheet of paper with two sentences. Respect cannot be inherited. It must be earned every day. No return address. No invitation for response. No opportunity for negotiation or reconciliation. Just a final statement of the lesson David had been too arrogant to learn. I hope someday he understands what he lost. Harold had advised against any contact, even anonymous communication. You've built a new life, he'd pointed out. Why risk giving David any information he could use to locate you? But the letter wasn't for David's benefit. It was for mine. A formal end to the relationship that had defined 43 years of my life, the period at the end of a sentence that had run too long. The message was simple but complete. David had expected to inherit my respect, my gratitude, my resources, and my compliance with his plans. But respect couldn't be inherited like property or money. It had to be earned through daily choices, consistent character, and genuine care for others. David had chosen exploitation over respect. He'd inherited exactly what he'd earned, the consequences of his own character. Martha would have approved of the letter's brevity. She'd never wasted words on people who wouldn't listen. 2 years have passed since I discovered that lottery ticket in my work jacket. People assume the money changed my life, but that's not quite accurate. The money gave me options I already deserved. What changed my life was standing up for myself, refusing to accept disrespect as the price of family connection, choosing dignity over peacekeeping. The oceanfront condominium is comfortable, but comfort wasn't the goal. Independence was. The ability to wake up each morning knowing that my day would unfold according to my choices, not someone else's manipulation. I still miss Martha every day, but I no longer feel guilty about surviving her. She'd wanted me to maintain my dignity and independence. The lottery ticket simply provided the means to honor her wishes. David calls Harold's office occasionally, usually around holidays or his birthday. Harold's secretary has standard instructions: no forwarding of messages, no updates on my status, no information about my location or activities. As far as David knows, I could be anywhere, doing anything. That uncertainty is probably more painful than knowledge would be. I've learned that family isn't defined by genetics or obligation. It's defined by respect, genuine care, and mutual consideration. My real family now includes Patricia, Harold, the scholarship recipients, and the other seniors in my building who understand the value of independence. The lottery ticket just gave me options I already deserved. The rest, the dignity, the peace, the satisfaction of a life well lived, those things money can't buy. But they can't be stolen either, not unless you let them.